In the depths of Hubbard's cave, a delayed rescue of two trapped cavers sparked a clash between families and law enforcement. Were they found in time? Then, journey with us to the Marble Arch cave system in Ireland, where a tragic 1995 expedition led to a massive rescue operation. What went wrong deep underground? Let's find out. Before we dive into the video, I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have subscribed to this channel. Our subscriber rate has grown from 8% to 13%, which is truly amazing. If you're new here, simply click the subscribe button, like this video, and hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads. Now let's get into the video. Hubbard's Cave in Colorado was home to one of the most bizarre cave rescues of all time. Two families pleaded for help after two adults disappeared without a trace. Law enforcement made the unprecedented move to block rescuers from entering Hubbard's Cave for days. Later, rescuers were allowed inside, and then a fight erupted after the rescue, which sparked another investigation. The families accused the police with failing to comply with procedures, and the investigators claimed the lost cavers staged their own disappearance. Did rescuers make it in time to save the two lost cavers? Which side was right? Join us as we uncover the mysteries of the Hubbard's Cave rescue. Hubbard's Cave was named after settler William Hubbard when he and his brother-in-law Griff Jones uncovered the cave during their journey for gold in 1892. Originally, they only found a pile of boulders, but as they broke them apart, the tumbling rubble revealed a cave entrance. Hubbard and Jones searched for a better entrance, and they found an opening they could easily explore without laboring against tons of rock. Inside, the pair found campfires left by native Ute tribes. The Ute have a tradition known as the Bear Dance, which is a 10-day celebration held in March. In the past, they raced horses, gambled, and ate before and after the main event. In reverence to the bears they hunted, the Ute people gathered to dance like a bear scratching a tree, while musicians played instruments called rasps or notched sticks that mimic the sound of claws on bark. Afterward, the designated storyteller would weave interesting and allegorical tales around the campfire. Hubbard and Jones even noted that there was evidence of bears living in the cave as well. The prospectors were enchanted by the cave. They kept walking deeper as each new step revealed new cave formations and crystals they had never seen before. Eventually, they realized they were lost. In their panic, they wound their way through the labyrinth of the cave, which only worsened their situation. They nearly resigned to their fate when their hunting dog trotted into their lamplight and led them back to the surface. Today, Hubbard's Cave is located on the edge of the Glenwood Canyon on a rolling, rocky hillside dotted with pine trees overlooking the Colorado River. Another entrance was later found, giving the cave 3 different paths, and Hubbard's houses one of the largest bat populations in Colorado. For over a century since its rediscovery, Hubbard's remained open to the public, and it was a popular attraction for cavers, hikers, and partiers. Back in 2003, 54-year-old John Hayter and 49-year-old Sherry DeCrow drove into the Colorado wilderness to start their expedition into the countryside. They stopped at a trailhead parking space and started again down a long trail meant for bicycles and ATVs, though some brave hikers choose to walk the whole 9-mile trail along this route just to reach the actual trail that leads to Hubbard's. The long trail leads to a secretive quarter-mile trail marked by an outdated and unkempt sign. The last stretch is steep and rocky, which makes the journey even more challenging. John and Sherry were fit, but the hike drained them more than they realized. Their fatigue would come back to bite them, limiting their mobility and strength in the cave and causing them to make poor choices that led to disaster. The main entrance to Hubbard's is a triangular hole in the streaked rock that protrudes from the ground. The floor of the entrance is lined with sharp, jagged stones that have splinted from the cliffside or the ceilings of the cave. The ceiling dips down to resemble a dark, gaping maw ready to devour all those who dare to enter. Sherry only planned to show John the way to Hubbard's Cave, but once they reached the cold and curious void in the rock, they threw caution to the wind and ventured into the darkness. Just like Hubbard and Jones before them, the ambitious pair entered the cave, oblivious to the dangers that lay in wait below them. After their long trek, they had an easy start to the cave. Over the years, the government installed some steps, a metal tube, a support wall, and a ladder at the entrance because so many non-cavers ventured to the site. John and Sherry fit among those casual cavers who don't take splunking seriously. They brought flashlights instead of headlamps. They had no backup lights. They wore regular athletic hiking gear, and they had no food or water. On top of all these mistakes, they then started their journey by ignoring one of the most important steps for any cave adventure. They didn't tell anyone they were going into Hubbard's cave. Communicating the plan to others is a crucial step for anyone who wants to explore the deep tunnels below our feet. Once inside a cave, cell phones won't work. If you get stuck, injured, or lost, you're stuck relying on a chance encounter with another cave group, or you're dead. John and Sherry overestimated their abilities and thought that Hubbard's would be safe, since it was such a popular attraction. Venturing into the cave, they found the same formations that bewildered William Hubbard when he explored the cave. There were selenite needles that jabbed from the walls like strands of glass, cave hair formed by gypsum oozing out of small pores in the rock to make curly hairs or long strands of silky-looking rope, and they found many more otherworldly sights as they hiked deeper below. The pair twisted around the bends of the cave without realizing Hubbard's contains 3 major passages. Nearly 400 feet into the cave, they noticed one of their lights was flickering. They shook the flashlight and jostled the electronics around a bit like you would with an old remote. Maybe the batteries were dislodged, or there was something stuck in the contacts that jammed up the electrical current. The device looked fine, but it was pretty old. Most people have flashlights for convenience, not for emergencies. Flashlights are rarely replaced, and few people fork out the money for a quality device. One of them realized how old the flashlight was after noticing the once clear plastic was slightly yellow from sunlight exposure. Then, the flashlight completely turned off. For once on this unfortunate adventure, they made the right call and turned around to go back to the safety of the forest above. As they walked through the narrow archways and over slippery ground, the other would-be caver nervously laughed and mentioned their flashlight was also old. They said they'd buy a new one later and offered to go shopping together. But roughly halfway back, they realized their light was dimming. Then, a familiar sight made their hearts sink and their stomachs turn. Their last remaining torch began to flicker. With one last flare, their only remaining light source was extinguished. Once more, they made a sound decision to remain stationary and pray for help. When Sherry didn't return home that night, no one seemed to notice. She was an adult, and she could come and go as she pleased. But 2 days after the pair went missing, her family, the DeCrows, tried to contact her. They only got her voicemail. They tried her home, but she wasn't there either. Sherry's daughter, Ramia, convened with the rest of the family to discuss her mother's absence. Some thought she might have skipped town to marry her friend John, but others were afraid something terrible had happened to her. That night, they submitted a missing persons report to the Garfield County Sheriff's Department. Now, some members of her family thought her ex-husband could be to blame, so the police investigated him. The family suggested her ex was violent, and fear quickly spread about what he could have done to her. Of course, her ex-husband was a dead end, and he had alibis for the night of her disappearance. Knowing that Sherry would sometimes explore the outdoors, the Air National Guard ran a helicopter sweep of the river and other water sources to search for her body. This search turned up no results, and it also failed to find their vehicle, which was still parked at the trailhead. That's when the DeCrows started to butt heads with the police. They thought the investigators didn't do a thorough job, so they recruited a family friend to fly his personal plane in search for any signs of Sherry. After only 30 minutes in the air, This independent pilot found her Suburban parked at the trail in the Colorado wilderness. This spot and its connection to Hubbard's has been popular for over 100 years. The family immediately knew what happened, but they couldn't convince the police. In their eyes, deputies and others involved in the search should have immediately connected the dots that Sherry could have been inside Hubbard's cave. But instead of calling a rescue team, they taped off the parking lot as a possible crime scene. After far too long, days after Sherry and John got lost, a canine unit led police to Hubbard's cave. Reports suggest that the police had no idea how to proceed. They called for Sherry down the cold stone steps of the cave and shined their lights into the darkness, but they didn't venture inside. To make matters worse, they still didn't call a cave rescue team. Sherry's son and daughter said they would search the cave themselves and recruit cavers to guide them to find their mother. The chances of finding her alive continued to plummet every second. They knew she was inside and they needed to act immediately, but the police refused to grant entry into Hubbard's because of the already debunked fears about her ex and the possibility of foul play, which could endanger the lives of anyone entering the cave. Since it was considered a crime scene, they wouldn't allow anyone to potentially tamper with evidence, even though they could have escorted the rescuers to ensure they complied with procedures. The two camps argued until a thunderstorm rolled over the mountains and valleys of the area and the police disbanded the search party. Inside the cave, John and Sherry were struggling. The cold was numbing their rattling fingers and the darkness was messing with their heads. At first, they thought about what they would do when they got out, but by the third day, they were crushed by hopelessness. Temperatures in Hubbard's cave dropped to as low as 3 degrees above freezing. Then, as the storm came through, rain started to trickle down overhead and little streams snaked over their shoes. They didn't see the water coming in the absolute darkness of the cave, and now they had to face the cold with wet clothes. But at least these muddy drops of water could keep them alive, for now. Like her family, Sherry even wondered if her vindictive husband could be to blame for their misfortune. John also had an angry ex. Did their divorced partners collude to sabotage their batteries on purpose? The thought struck fear into them. What if their exes were waiting outside? And what were they planning to do with them? Beyond fear and the cold, the pair also faced other challenges inside the tunnels. Hubbard's cave is at an elevation of 8,400 feet. Outside, the air is thinner and oxygen content is lower. It takes travelers days or weeks to adjust to the dry and thin atmosphere. They were used to it, but the body can only handle so much, and the oxygen inside the cave was even lower. They sat stationary, sucking all the fresh air from their surroundings. On top of all their other problems, the pair was slowly being poisoned by their own stagnant breath. By day 4, John was in bad shape. The two couldn't see how ragged they looked in the pitch blackness of the cave, but John's starvation and slow asphyxiation were becoming unbearable. If help didn't arrive soon, Hubbard's cave would become John's tomb. The thunderstorm battered the land for what felt like an eternity. The whole time, the DeCrows battled against the police to return and perform a rescue operation. Finally, after 4.5 days of Sherry's disappearance, police let the family and their team enter the cave. Of course, the police, who delayed the rescue for almost a week, sat outside. Even as the police watched people who had no idea how to properly explore caves enter the dark reaches of Hubbard's, they still didn't call an official rescue squad to aid them. The brave DeCrows weren't official rescuers. They had no gear. They lacked all the training cave rescuers dedicate their lives to learning and perfecting. But that day, they became rescuers. Armed with only crude flashlights and determination to find their missing family members, the team located Sherry and John only minutes after entering the cave. Because the group found Sherry so easily after entering the cave, That proved to the DeCrows that the police didn't even try to find her. After being gaslit for almost a week, the tension escalated into a fight between the police and the DeCrows. Allegedly, a detective choked one of the volunteers who joined the DeCrows to find the lost cavers. People on both sides held back the more aggressive members of each group, and eventually the threat of charges simmered the upset family members while John and Sherry were evaluated by medics. They were both exhausted and dehydrated. Their families explained the situation from their perspectives, which disgusted the fearful and shivering cavers. The medics noted they were weak and dehydrated, but they gave Sherry and John the choice to get hospitalized or return home. After seeing the fervor of their families, they opted to go home with them instead of traveling with emergency personnel. Home was a long way off, so the group stopped at a hotel to recover from the harrowing incident. It was later revealed that the sheriff never alerted local media outlets about Sherry's disappearance. The sheriff denied the cave rescue because he thought it could be a crime scene. But if that's the case, then why did he ignore a major component of a missing persons case? If he had given the public info on her car, it's likely that cavers or hikers would have found her Suburban the very next day after they went missing. The allegations of a detective choking a volunteer rescue were investigated by the Colorado Bureau of Investigations, and word spread throughout the nearby towns. Further adding fuel to the fire, the police insinuated that John and Sherry staged their rescue, despite the visible and medical evidence that they were battered and succumbing to exposure. The sheriff based his claim off of the inconclusive missing persons search, which involved members of the FBI. Sources indicate the team never properly explored the cave, which invalidates the validity of the search. His claim also relies on the medical evaluation that said the pair were fine. But the evidence seems to suggest the sheriff simply misunderstood the medic's evaluation. The medics have an obligation to prevent medical deterioration, but if John and Sherry got fluids, food, and rest, they should be fine. After seeing the tension between both groups, the medics could have made the call out of pity for Sherry and John. If they were sent to the hospital, they would be subjected to interviews from the police, which would only make them more upset. However, on the other hand, if Sherry and John got worse after leaving, the medics would be responsible for their condition. The medics would also be putting their necks on the line to lie to police. But from the reports, it seems like that the cavers and the police could have made mistakes, so it's also possible the medics dropped the ball as well. And in what seems like one final admission of incompetence, the sheriff said he knew the contact information of multiple Colorado cave rescue teams and the procedures for cave rescues, but in spite of the dogs leading them straight to Hubbard's, the sheriff claimed that he had, and I'm quoting, "no reason to presume John and Sherry were lost in a cave," end quote. The sheriff also said he still believed in his method and that he'd do it the same way again. Both the cavers and the sheriff highlight how ignorance can easily become the death of anyone daring to explore underground caves. If John and Sherry knew the dangers and prepared accordingly, they probably would have been fine. And if the sheriff really understood cave rescues, his decisions could have been different, and the pair could have been saved much faster. But, as the DeCrows and the volunteers showed, you don't have to be a professional to be a hero when it counts. The Marble Arch cave system is one of the largest in Ireland. Since its discovery back in the 18th century, the Marble Arches have become a world-renowned show cave thanks to the beautiful limestone karst that adorns the ceilings of the cave's main chamber. But even though the cave has been well developed with plenty of safety features added over the years, the cave still remains a dangerous place for would-be explorers. In 1995, a group of 10 cavers found themselves trapped in a section known as Cradle Hole, which sparked a huge rescue operation. And since then, there have been many more rescues over the years in Ireland's Marble Arches. Grab your lamps and brace yourself as we find out who made it out of the Marble Arches, and as we mourn those that weren't lucky enough to escape the deadly tunnels deep beneath the Irish wilderness. In 1732, Reverend and Dean of Killaloe, William Henry, became the first person to publish a written history of the above-ground section of the cave in his book, A Natural History of the Parish of Killishire by Rev. William Henry, rector of it. In his book, he wrote about the spring of water where the Cladle River exits the underground aquifer and continues its flow on the surface. He also describes 3 large sinkholes that would later lead spelunkers to discover the Marble Arches. William Henry descended into one of the sinkholes, but he only made it about 300 feet into the cave before returning back to the surface. Over 100 years later, in 1895, Lister Jameson and Edward Alfred Martel ventured over 1,000 feet into the cave using a canvas boat. During their expedition, they found the place where the Sru Croppa, Owenbreen, and Agenron rivers meet. The path took them to the Grand Gallery, and they traveled further to the cave's pool chamber. The oldest parts of the cave contain uranium minerals, which were found to be 320,000 years old. These minerals were present in the ground long before the birth of the Marble Arch caves. Later, samples of pollen near the sandy banks of cave show that the main sections date back between 35,000 and 75,000 years. The Marble Arches are the perfect place to learn about the geology of caves with their wide spectrum of formations like vadose passages, speleothems, boulder fields, and phreatic tubes. By the early 1900s, cavers started exploring the plateau and found a pit cave next to the 3 larger sinkholes on the plateau. Descending into this pothole showed a new entrance to the pool chamber. In 1908, the Yorkshire Ramblers Exploration, Mountaineering, and Caving Club conducted a test to map the underground water flow between multiple cave systems in the area. They used red dye to find that the Agenron River connected to Upper Cradle Hole, which extended the size of the Marble Arches. Following their work in the Marble Arches, the Yorkshire Ramblers Club has continued to make surveys and explore landscapes all around the world, both above and below ground. The discovery of the connection at Cradle Hole was monumental. Cradle Hole itself was a natural wonder, and it would become one of the most defining parts of the Marble Arches caves. Cradle Hole is a 492 feet by 328 feet doline that's divided into an upper and lower portion by various sumps. Lower Cradle Hole has a triple-layered series of passages that connects to the main chamber with numerous hidden passages which connect to Upper Cradle via a 524 feet long underwater passage. The Cradle Hole area is a destination for cave divers who can explore the cave's various sumps, but only skilled divers should attempt the feat since the water is cold and heavy. Rainfalls can froth the water, leading to dangerous currents and low visibility. Cradle Hole's challenging terrain and alluring experience would become the site of the first major incident in the history of the Marble Arches. Decades after the connection to Cradle Hole was discovered, in 1995, a group of 10 explorers ventured into Lower Cradle Hole. The group was part of the caving team from the Dublin Institute of Technology. The team entered the cave at 1 p.m. on Sunday, January 15th. They were trying to reach the Grand Gallery of the Marble Arch Cave when sudden rainfall filled the underground sumps. The rush of water created a strong undertow that dragged 2 members of the team underwater in a section known as a duck, a low-level tunnel. One of the cavers who noticed the missing members was part of the Irish Cave Rescue Organization, or ICRO. The ICRO is a team of volunteers that's over 100 members strong. The ICRO provide rescue services and first aid training across the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the UK. The ICRO official searched the area but couldn't locate the 2 missing cavers. The duck where the 2 explorers fell had a current that flowed into the chamber at the Marble Arches, so there was hope that they might make it through. But as time passed, it became clear that they were unable to navigate in the swirling water. Rescue divers were dispatched downstream at the Grand Gallery to swim through the ducks from the other direction, where they discovered the bodies of the 2 missing explorers. But the tragedy didn't end there. Shortly after they found the 2 college spelunkers, another member was reported missing. The team frantically spread out to search through all available ducts and flooded passageways, but they were unable to locate the 3rd person. In response, the ICRO called in backup, and the RUC Mountain Rescue Team was also dispatched. To aid in the search, the Royal Air Force scrambled a helicopter to search the sinkholes and other exits. The storm continued to worsen, and the search was called off for the night. After the flooding subsided, they found the body of the 3rd caver almost 100 feet downstream from the ducks they were searching in. The Cradle Hole tragedy claimed the lives of 21-year-old Conleth Cormacan, 20-year-old Philip Marshall, and 22-year-old Brian Patrick Kennedy. The entrance to the ducts where the men perished have since been grated shut, and a memorial plaque was placed in their honor. The 1995 Cradle Hole incident may have been the most famous attempted rescue operation in the history of the Marble Arches, but the cave and its surrounding system continues to be the site of rescues over the years. In 2009, a Polish caver and resident of Ireland was exploring in the Polprulish cave near the popular entrance to the Marble Arches. He was 250 feet below the surface when he found himself trapped in the cave's cold, dark catacombs after a tunnel partially collapsed. Thankfully, his two caving partners were free to call for help. The ICRO and the police service of Northern Ireland were dispatched with drills to free him. The drills weren't getting the job done, so they brought in explosives to blast apart the wreckage. It took the team 20 hours, but they reached the Polish caver, who was rattled but unharmed. On a Friday evening in December of 2014, two men were visiting the Marble Arches when they wandered off the beaten path. They climbed up to the rocky cliffs above the visitor site when they went missing. The Northern Ireland Ambulance Service and the Northwest Mountain Rescue were dispatched alongside traditional rescue crews. News outlets sounded the alarm of the missing men, and above ground, a raging blizzard disrupted the rescue effort. Eventually, emergency personnel made miraculous contact with the men after they called for help on their cell phones. Normally, caves are insulated by hundreds of feet of solid stone that make them impenetrable to cell phone signals. But, thanks to the development of the cave, the signals were boosted near the visitor area, which gave the men just enough reception bars to make the call. Through their communication, the rescue team was able to guide the two men back to safety, and neither of them had any injuries other than the biggest scare of their lives. 4 years later in 2018, a party of 4 went caving in the Marble Arch Natural Reserve on Easter weekend. The team split into groups of 2 and went out to explore different areas. They agreed to meet back at their camp at nightfall, but only one pair showed up. After waiting for a few tense hours, the pair called the ICRO to their campsite at the Quilcog Mountain. The ICRO sent a 12-person team into the Marble Arches with another 10 on standby in case the search was unsuccessful. Meanwhile, the Northwest Mountain Rescue Team sent 11 people into the above-ground wilderness in search of the lost man and woman. Thankfully, the cavers were well prepared with documented plans for their routes, which helped the rescue efforts. Even with a clear starting point, it still took the team 7 grueling hours in the dead of night to track down the missing cavers. The rescue team finally made contact with the pair in the Cascades Rising Cave and guided them to the surface. The two were cold and wet, but they were happy to be saved. The Marble Arches underwent development in the late 1900s to turn the main cave into a tourist destination. Concrete walkways were installed, lighting systems were added, guardrails were placed, and stairs and metal tunnels were created to make the cave safer for visitors. There's even a unique dining experience for adventurous foodies. All known entrances to the cave have since been sealed with gates to prevent unauthorized access and to help prevent accidents. The more exotic and untouched portions of the cave remain open to brave explorers and researchers, but only upon permission from the cave management team. The management team at the Marble Arches occasionally hosts emergency planning exercises to help cavers, employees, researchers, and interested people who want to learn crucial survival tips during underground emergencies. In 2018, 10 organizations took part in the exercise, including the Irish Cave Rescue Organization, fire rescue teams, and even the Coast Guard. Since rescue operations often involve multiple agencies, routine exercises like these help the different organizations work better together to avoid bureaucratic snags and communication errors during critical life-saving windows. The Marble Arches are one of the best caving tourist attractions in Ireland. The cave's gorgeous structures and intricate tunnels attract novices and veterans from all across the world. But even though it's got well-developed sections with tons of safety features, the cave still remains dangerous for those who wander off in the twisting, slippery caverns deep below ground. Would you travel to see the Marble Arches or brave the icy waters at Cradle Hole? Let us know in the comments section, and hit that like and subscribe button because you don't want to miss the next cave rescue story.